Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. This session is being presented by Mike DeLeo, SCORE volunteer, who is a mentor and workshop presenter for SCORE. Prior to joining us, Mike spent years working with a nonprofit organization in Delaware as a board member, a chair, and a finance leader. He brings great experience in this topic. We thank you, Mike, for sharing this program today and your background with nonprofits, and trust that all of the viewers will find it informative and helpful.
Thank you, Maria. Happy to be here, and I hope everyone does.
We'll take a moment to talk a bit about SCORE for those of you who may not be familiar. My name is Maria Smith, and I'm a volunteer with SCORE of Chester and Delaware counties. SCORE is a nonprofit organization also that has been in existence for over 50 years and is a resource partner to the Small Business Administration. SCORE's mission is to foster a strong small business community by providing free mentorship and business education. We are here to support you and to help you grow your business or nonprofit organization. Here in Chester and Delaware counties, we have more than 100 volunteers ready to help. Our mentoring and most of our educational programs are free. You will find many tools, templates, and other business resources on our website, Resource Library. This presentation and the recorded webinar will be made available to you in an email after today's session. You all have been placed on mute so that we can avoid distractions. Mike will address your questions in the Q&A box during and at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A box for questions and use the chat if you have a comment or a resource that you would like to share. Okay, so if we're ready, Mike, I will turn this over to you.
Great, thank you, Maria. Good morning, everybody. In the next hour, we're going to cover some topics on how to get started in a nonprofit. We're going to talk about the fine print, which is really the administrative steps you need to go through. We're going to talk about how you get people to help you. It does take a village to do this. Of course, you need money. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about a nonprofit versus a profit business in terms of where they're similar and where they're different. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Then we'll talk about some issues around how you manage risk. One is about making sure that you have a diverse donation field out there. And also, like a normal business, you need to know your strengths and weaknesses in order to be continually successful. You have to maintain focus on what it is you're trying to do, which we call keep your eye on the ball. And there will be good times, bad times, like there are with many things in life. And how do you weather those and not be surprised when it happens? And importantly, how do you learn from others? Because we all are in this together. Now, I'm going to be necessarily covering these issues at a relatively high level. As Maria mentioned, you're welcome to ask questions or offer comments. But when you receive the PDF after the webinar, you will receive additional pages at the end that go into much more detail about a lot of the stuff I'm going to cover, like which forms you have to file and stuff like that. So, hopefully you'll find that to be helpful as you move forward. Okay, next slide, please.
Oops.
So what is a nonprofit? A nonprofit is an organization that provides some type of public or community benefit without trying to make a profit. So the key is it's really public benefit versus personal profit, and it's funded by donations as opposed to investors. So basically, it's making an investment in the community in a group that will helpfully make lives better for other people in many different ways. Next slide, please. So this gives you an idea of the type of nonprofits. Now, there are over 62,000 nonprofits in Pennsylvania. Chester County, there's close to 1,000. And this gives you an idea of the areas that they cover. Human services is the largest individual sector, but many colleges are also, and schools are also nonprofits. Most hospitals are nonprofits. As well, you have those organizations that promote interest in the arts, work on preserving nature, and you have a group called associations, which are groups like the Rotary and Kiwanis Club and things like that, which are technically nonprofits, but they're really a group of people who gather together to do some good, but they don't necessarily provide a specific service to the community. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what it takes to get started. Next slide, please. So when you start a nonprofit, you need to start with what I think is one of the most important factors, which is, what is it you're going to do? This is typically stated as a mission statement, where you basically articulate what the purpose of the organization is, and that helps you attract help in terms of people who wish to help you do this, and also obviously money and resources and stuff like that. But to do this, you have to ask yourself, why do you really want to do this? And try to get to the true core of what your purpose is. And then, since it is, it deals with supply and demand just like normal businesses do. There's a limited supply of money out there. There's also different areas of demand. So you want to be able to connect your mission with the need in the community. And then also, importantly, how do you measure results? How can you tell that what you're doing is making an impact? That not only helps you define what it is you're doing, but it also will be critical when you go to request grants and things like that, because people are going to want to make sure that you're producing the kind of results that you want. So really, the mission statement is critical to attract funds and support of volunteers. Next slide, please. So how do you know what your mission is? And a lot of times in working with nonprofits, people have a very caring heart and they want to do good in the community, but sometimes it's hard to kind of narrow that down. One way to do that is to look at the intersection of, what is it that you love to do? What is it that will serve the world or serve your community? And what is it that you're personally good at, or you have a group of people that are personally good at? The intersection of those 3 points is literally the sweet spot. And if you can connect your mission to that, you've got a much more likely chance of being successful, because you're going to have a good quality product, you're going to have the passion behind it, and you're going to be able to determine that you're doing the defined good in the community. Next slide, please. So before you get started, I think it helps to ask yourself, are there existing local organizations with the same or similar mission? Because it really is about competing for limited dollars. If you don't have experience with a nonprofit, I would recommend you volunteer or partner with an existing nonprofit that has a mission similar to what you want to do. This allows you to learn, and also you personally can create a faster impact because you'll be leveraging off of that organization and, again, doing what it is you want to do. And frankly, it requires less resources. You don't need as much time and money if you're going to volunteer or partner than it is to start on your own. And importantly, you can always start your own after you learn the ropes and you feel like you're ready. Next slide, please. So to start, you need a plan and you need funding. So the plan is, who, what, where, when, and how. SCORE fortunately offers many resources around business plans and free mentoring. As Maria mentioned, and we'll cover this again at the end, we are offering access to our mentors and the online webinars. And I would encourage you to take advantage of it. Virtually all of it is free to you. Now, funding standpoint, now we're talking about Pennsylvania here, but typically you need $500 to $1,000 in filing fees. Now that may change based on your mission, but it kind of gives you an idea of where to start. And the business plan, or a startup plan, it doesn't have to be a business plan necessarily, will help guide you because it'll identify what it is you need to get done and help you monitor your progress towards getting to your goal. Next slide, please. So how long does this take? In Pennsylvania, it normally takes 2 to 3 months to get the state and federal approvals. Other approvals may be required based on the mission, such as do you need permits? Do you need child care certifications? Do you need medical licenses, things like that? But the basic structure should take you about 2 to 3 months. Next slide, please. And again, I'll reiterate, in the backup slides you'll get, there's a lot more detail on this stuff. So what kind of paperwork do you need to have? Well, you need to have a legal entity. And the legal entity could be an LLC, it could be a corporation, it could be an association. They all have different advantages and disadvantages. And with that, you'll need articles of incorporation and bylaws. The IRS will need to make a determination that you're a bona fide nonprofit by giving you a 501(c) designation. This is typically gained through a Form 1023, and there's two versions of this. If you're a relatively small, meaning you're only going to have about $50,000 a year in revenue, and you don't have a large structure like an LLC or corporation, you can file a 1023-EZ, which is much easier. But frankly, you need to do whatever form is required so you have the right kind of structure going forward. There's always a temptation to start out with something small because it's easier, but you can get down the road and realize that what you have isn't really going to meet your needs. So give it some thought ahead of time. And we also, by the way, do offer SCORE webinars on different kinds of legal structures, LLC, corporations, S-Corps. You can get those on the website. They're typically for commercial businesses, but a lot of the same legal structures apply to nonprofits as well. And you also need to register with the state of Pennsylvania. You'll need to register the company or the LLC, just say for purposes of this. And then you also need to make sure that you're registered as a nonprofit. Okay, now you can do all of these things yourselves. We're going to give you some resources to do that. But if you can have the resources or contacts with an experienced lawyer or accountant, you know, they do this stuff all the time. You just need to get one that's experienced with nonprofits. Next slide, please. Okay, so Maria, let's pause here for a second. Are there any questions on the beginning part?
There is one question, Mike. It's from Margaret, and she wants to know, how do you transition an LLC to a nonprofit?
What you typically would do is you have to look at the registration of the LLC, and you may have to make an amendment. Because if it was formed as a for-profit business, it needs to be re-registered as a nonprofit. Now, I'm not a lawyer and SCORE can't give you legal advice, but basically you have to contact the state and the IRS and change their recognition of the LLC into a nonprofit. And there's ways to do that, but you may also, you know, when you look at that, consider, are you better off starting a second LLC that's registered as a nonprofit? And you can look at the pros and cons of that as you get into the process. Okay, so let's move on. We're talking about It Takes a Village, which is really around, you know, how you get volunteers to help you. Most nonprofits are started by a few committed individuals, but to operate successfully and to grow, you need other people to help you. And this is, again, where your mission comes in, because as you share your mission with people, you may find people that say, oh, that's a great idea. I'd like to help you. What can I do? Now, you will need a board of directors and officers. The distinction is the board of directors has a legal responsibility to make sure that the nonprofit is operating properly, that the money is being spent in the right areas, and that all the different governance things are being handled. You know, there's some annual reports and stuff you have to do. Officers are those people that actually run the day-to-day operation. Typically, there's an executive director, there's a secretary, there's a treasurer, and they're more the operating staff, where the board of directors, again, has this legal overview of the process. There can be employees, and typically here you need to find people, again, who have skills that can help you and are very much supportive of your mission. Volunteers, and of course, volunteers are normally the best resource for a nonprofit because people are willing to give of their time without having to be paid. But again, you have to manage volunteers. And then you have advisors. Now, advisors are people who bring a specific technical expertise. Perhaps it's a lawyer, perhaps it's a medical professional. And what they can do is help you deal with issues based on the mission and the delivery of services of the nonprofit. It's a nice role because they're not as committed as the board, but you can take advantage of their expertise and basically use them as a sounding board to help you deal with issues as you move forward. Next slide, please. So let's talk about volunteer and advisory services. Next slide, please. And Maria, please go forward one more.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so when you're looking for volunteers, what do you look for? Or this is actually for board members, employees, everybody. You want them to value the mission, because that's critical to attract folks that are of a similar mindset as you are. And if they're an employee, are they willing to work for below market pay? Now, this is a little bit awkward, but typically people that work at nonprofits recognize they're probably making a little less money than they might in a commercial business, but that's where the mission comes in again. It's important to them to give service, and they're willing to agree to those terms in order to do that. You also want to have people that are willing to volunteer their time for free. Again, the mission is key for that. And then again, you want to find people who can provide critical resources, either as a board member or as an advisor. And they might provide money, expertise, networking in the community, and a passion for the mission. So let's pause for a minute and change gears and talk about various community groups that are out there that are basically set up to be able to support nonprofits. Next slide, please.
Mike, just before we move to that, we have another question in the Q&A that might be relevant to what you just shared. And the question is from Eva, and she would like to know, are there legal requirements for a nonprofit to have a board of directors?
Well, the answer is yes, but it depends on the legal structure. So if it's an LLC, for instance, you need to have board members under Pennsylvania law. Typically a C Corp, you would need to as well, although that's a little more of a individual thing, but a corporation would need a board. And the critical role is that both the IRS and the state look to the board as providing the oversight to make sure that the nonprofit is operating properly. Clearly with nonprofits, you're getting an advantage because you don't have to pay taxes. And they want to make sure that for that privilege, you're doing what you need to do properly. Hope that's answers it. If not, please ask another question when you're ready.
Okay. Mike, are you ready to move on, or do we have any polls that we need to pull up yet for your program?
Well, I would be interested to know how many people are actually in a nonprofit now, or are they planning to start one? I think that's in the polling.
Okay, let me put that up here.
Please.
Hopefully everyone can see this. It should just take a minute. You can choose one of the answers that apply to you.
Yes, great. Thank you, Maria. We can get the answer when people have had a chance to do that. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide.
Mike, I'll just share the results real quickly so you can see
that's
what.
Fast. Okay.
That is fast. Okay.
Great.
Lots of people thinking about it.
Cool. Good. Good. Thank you.
All
Okay,
right.
so when you look at starting a nonprofit, it's helpful to know that there's organizations in the community that are out there to help you. So please, the next slide.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about 4 of them that are spread between Delaware County and Chester County. One of them is the Communities Foundation in Delaware County. This organization traces its roots back to the Taylor Hospital Foundation. Apparently, when that hospital was sold, the funds were put in a foundation, and over time it has evolved into what is now the Communities Foundation. They do targeted grants, and I would encourage everybody to go on their website. You can see it here on the slide. Do it when you have an opportunity. Anyway, they provide targeted grants which are looking to make inroads in terms of certain social issues. For instance, grandparents taking care of minor children and groups like that. They provide scholarships. That's a very big part of what they do. They provide a service called physical sponsorship, where if you have a discussion with them, in some cases, it's based on criteria they have, they will allow a nonprofit to operate under their credentials, which means you don't have to have your own certification, but you operate under those, and at the end of the year, your information is rolled into theirs, and they do all the reporting to the state and the IRS for you. They also have something called donor advised funds, where if individuals wish to make charitable contributions, they provide the money to the foundation, and then the money will then help that individual donate the money where they like, but the foundation acts as an intermediary, invests the funds, and basically handles it on a professional level. They're in Delaware County. That's mainly where they do their work, but they're a very fine organization. Next slide, please. Now, another organization in Delaware County is the Foundation for Delaware County. They're based in Media. And I think it's important to recognize that in the last few days, they've announced a $2 million program to offer grants to nonprofits with a wide range of initiatives. Again, they handle women, children, and teen programs, public health programs, and I would encourage you again to go on their website. They specify how much money they're putting into each of these buckets, but basically you would write a grant indicating that you want to make inroads in those areas, and then they evaluate it and they grant the money. So it's a great program, and it's something, again, I encourage you to take advantage of. They also have grants related to COVID challenges. The Foundation for Delaware County also provides resources to support nonprofits. So for instance, they have advisory services where they will help you deal with issues around trying to get your board to operate. They can help you with training. They can help you as a resource in terms of identifying, accountants and lawyers and things like that. So they're really very good to help on a day-to-day basis. And they act as an advisor to foundations. So for instance, like the donor advised funds, if people want to donate money, these people will manage the money for them and then help direct the donation to those organizations that are most deserving. So they kind of vet their donation. They vet the organizations and make sure that it's doing the services that people expect, and then they're in a position to make those donations to the organization. Next slide, please. There's also resources in Chester County. One of them is the Chester County Community Foundation. Again, they do a lot of the same things, grants, including COVID relief, scholarships, donor advised funds, targeted fields of interest. Now, interestingly for these folks, they have, for instance, funds that are in support of people doing work with thoroughbred horses, for instance. Now, this could be horse rescues and things like that. But they basically have people that are interested in that field, donate money, and the foundation, channels the donations to the right organizations. They also have nonprofit volunteer programs where they help match people. People that want to volunteer with organizations that need the help. And again, these people also provide training programs for nonprofits and their boards. So it's basically a combination of money and expert help. And they're based in Chester County, in Westchester. Next slide, please. And one other organization that we'll mention is the Small Business Administration. While you typically think of them as handling, helping small businesses, commercial businesses get started, they do have COVID disaster relief programs that remain open for nonprofits. Their payroll protection program is open until May 31st. and they have an economic injury loans that are available until December 2021. If you're interested in that, please go to the SBA website indicated here and apply as early as you can. Now, Maria, I'm going to pull you into this and ask you to share your perspectives on some of these organizations.
Thanks, Mike. I guess my comments would be more general across all three groups that we had a chance to meet by Zoom this year. And I would just say a few things. One is I am so impressed with how deep and broad their experience is. These are really the experts in the nonprofit community. And like Mike was sharing, we learned ourselves about how many important resources and training opportunities they have across all kinds of types of nonprofits: healthcare, childcare, family counseling, religious services, and more. And I think the thing that we were most pleased to learn about was this funding opportunity, that each one of them has a variety of different funding loans as well as grants, and many of the loans are low interest loans. I also was impressed with, I think each of the groups have some level of what we call financial literacy and financial counseling support. And never has it been more important than in the COVID experience to have that available. So the only other thing I would like to share is that actually we're coming up soon in June to do our annual awards program. And one of our award winners this year is a nonprofit from Chester who we met a year ago by way of the Foundation for Delaware County. That's how we got to know her, and to learn that she was having some real challenges shifting from all in-person services to all remote services. And actually Mike is her mentor, and he worked with a bunch of our subject matter experts to help this client find some resources to improve her website, her communications, and actually be able to download forms right off of the site and continue all the services without any interruption, while other agencies like theirs were closed. So I think we have seen the proof of what these organizations can help do for these clients.
Great, Maria. Thank you for all those comments. They're very helpful. And I think we can have another poll now if you wish.
Okay. Let's get that up here. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yeah, great. Also, I would ask that if anyone, we've mentioned a few organizations here, but if anyone has other organizations that they're aware of in Chester and Delaware County that help nonprofits in the ways we've described or perhaps other ways, please let us know and share that information through the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate when other organizations can help each other, and we learn a lot in the process too.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Maria. Let's move
pull
on.
this one up just so we can take a quick peek at it, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that?
Okay.
All right.
Helpful. Yes, thank you.
All right.
Okay, the next section. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Are we on the right slide? I was just checking.
Next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, the next section talks about, how do you get money to help you get started? And next slide, please. And in my experience, a lot of times people starting nonprofits are doing it, with maybe some money they've saved up. Maybe they get money from relatives and folks that they know. But as you get into this, you really need to look at it in terms of how do you build a sustainable source of money? And typically the money can come from donations, again, as we've talked about. It can come from grants, and we've talked about the different foundations. There's a number of organizations in the Philadelphia area that provide grants. In fact, if you go to like the Philadelphia Library, for instance, has a database of regional organizations that provide grants. Again, the grant is typically targeted in terms of what it is you're doing, but again, it's a great source, and we'll show in a moment, but great grants are a significant source of money for nonprofits. You can have a fee for service, and an example of this would be the Y. So to join the Y, you pay so much money a month. The Y is a nonprofit. They're a very well-run organization, and they get a lot of their money from people effectively paying dues to join. Now, they welcome donations as well, but their business model is premised on providing a service and getting paid money for that. And in that, they also provide free memberships and stuff. You know, there's a whole needs process you can go through, but their basic model is they get paid by people taking advantage of their organization, their services. And there's government support that's available. And this typically is, again, targeted. We've spoken to Chester County, and Chester County tries to help nonprofits by providing employee-related resources and providing tax exemptions. And periodically, they will provide grants, but it's typically based on the program that the nonprofit's involved with that matches initiatives that the county wishes to make. Next slide, please. So this gives you an idea of 2018, where the money comes from. And you can see virtually 70% of it comes from individuals. 18% from foundations. That would typically include grants, as we've spoken about it. Bequests are people that include nonprofits as beneficiaries in their will, or they buy an insurance policy that has the nonprofit being the beneficiary. And then corporations. So this is banks and any organization out there will typically, if they're significant enough, will typically have a wish to make community donations, and you can apply to them again and seek to get money. It's like a grant. Typically, again, it's going to be based on what it is you're trying to make happen in the community. Next slide, please. So very briefly, we're going to talk about how a nonprofit compares to a for-profit business and where it doesn't. Next slide, please. So for-profit businesses, of course, have revenue, cost of sales, salaries, and then hopefully they get a profit and loss. Nonprofits get donations, grants, and fees, which is money coming in. They have to spend money to fund their programs. They often have employees and all that, so they have salaries and benefits. And at the end of the day, a nonprofit with a budget will either have a surplus, meaning they took in more money than they spent, or they'll have a deficit, which means the opposite. Now, obviously, you can't do anything very long with running deficits. So, but at the end of the day, my opinion is, and I'm a financial kind of person, that there's more from an organization standpoint and management standpoint, more in common between for-profits and nonprofits than there are differences. The key difference is simply that they're looking to have a different result at the end of the day, but they both need strong leadership to succeed. Next slide, please. Now, organizations, as they look at things, will do what's called a SWOT analysis, understanding your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We're just going to spend a moment doing that briefly using Wawa as an example. Next slide, please. So why do you want to know this? Well, you want to know your strengths, but knowing your weaknesses is actually going to help you survive challenges. And it's a valuable strategic process. Next slide, please. So what is it, why do you do a SWOT analysis? Well, it helps strengthen your business plan because it makes it more comprehensive. It helps navigate bumps in the road, like you're losing donors or you're facing new competition, because it gives you an opportunity to look for how you can mitigate those issues. It helps guide expansion plans, and it helps you to see potential implications of strategic initiatives. Now, we're going to pause for a moment and look at Wawa as an example of a SWOT analysis related to expansion plans. Next slide, please. So let's pretend we're Wawa and we want to expand. Well, I think we've all seen Wawa expand to many locations in the area. You now see them up and down the East Coast. They also want to add to their menu items. They're now offering dinners. Well, when you do that, how do you look at the implications on Wawa? Well, clearly their key strength is they're providing convenience. That means they have many locations. Well, when you have locations, you have a built-in weakness, which means you have to pay for those stores. You have to have more employees. So the bigger you get, the more fixed cost you have. As you offer fresh products, you also have the possibility of more spoilage. How do you know how much inventory to put in each store? So at the end of the day, you don't have, food spoiling so it can't be sold. And with their local presence, they've built a reputation that people expect that kind of service from Wawa. Now, if you look at expanding, if they're going to expand to other areas, they're going to start to encroach in the territory of other competitors. And how are they able to deal with those competitors and provide a Wawa experience that may be better than what they're having with the local companies? And also, frankly, as you get more locations and more food items, you have a more complex supply chain. How do you provide all the food to all those locations in a timely manner? And again, doing it in a way where you're not putting too much product in stores that can't be sold within a timely time. So this really is trying to simply talk about when you make a decision or you're considering a decision, it's important to consider the implications of it, because there could be things that you don't expect, or there could be things that you have to work on in order to make the change more successful. Next slide, please. So again, this basic concept is the same for all businesses. And the key is to make an honest assessment. And it really means, what are your strengths, but also what are your weaknesses and your threats? And then using that information to evaluate where you are and what it means if you're going to start to change direction in the future. It's critical to long-term success and growth. Next slide, please. Okay, let's pause. Are there any questions?
There are no current questions that I see in the Q&A box.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about risk management. Diversifying your revenue sources. Next slide, please. So usually when you start a nonprofit, you've got a limited source of funds. Again, you've got family members, you've got, pardon me for a second. You have family members, you have organizations that are helping you. As you proceed, you need to be looking for new sources of funds. This reduces the risk of relying on a few individual donors, and you're better able to weather economic cycles because you're going to have a wider range of places to go to get money. The main point is to try to avoid relying on just a few sources of income. I had experience with an arts nonprofit in Delaware that had a wealthy person supporting it, and they ran into problems, and they basically were relying on that sole person, and that gave that sole person a lot of influence over the organization, which was very well-meaning, but from an organization standpoint, it tended to limit what they could do. Next slide, please. So this is all about keeping focus. We talked earlier about your mission, and it's key that you focus on that mission. Next slide, please. So typically you start out with a focused mission, but that can change over time, and the expression is called mission creep. Why does that happen? Well, maybe extra money shows up. All of a sudden you have more funds than you originally needed, and you start to think about, what can we do with that? Also, sometimes the board changes and people come on with new ideas about what to do. Again, well-meaning, but they can try to sometimes influence the organization to go in a different direction than they were originally. And sometimes you get new leadership where they want to make an impact, make the organization bigger perhaps, maybe expand their mission, All those are very well meaning, but again, from a risk standpoint, you need to think about what that means. Next slide, please. So is it a bad thing? No, not necessarily, but you have to be careful. So the so-called extra money could dry up. If that happens, all of a sudden you're providing services that you no longer can afford. And what do you do about that? What you don't want to do is disappoint people that are relying on you because you're not able to deal with those services anymore. You could lose support from people who are committed to the initial mission. They might say, well, I loved you because you're doing this, but now you're doing that. And I don't feel as strongly about that. I'm going to take my money somewhere else. So you need to understand what is really driving the change, and will it really improve the mission or change it? Now, there's nothing wrong with changing the mission. If your community changes, the demand changes, and you want to try to meet that demand, you just need to think about it, because you're really making a fundamental change in which direction you're going in, and you don't want to lose people supporting you by doing that. Next slide, please. So we're all experiencing good times, bad times. COVID happens. The economy may do better, may not do as well. So let's talk about that. Next slide, please. So, as we've talked about it, nonprofits generally rely on the generosity of others, people that are willing, have the resources that they're willing to share. But sometimes those resources can change based on the economic cycles. Maybe the stock market's not doing as well. Maybe interest rates are going up. People simply have less discretionary income at times. And with almost 70% of the donations coming from individuals, you have to be cognizant that that can happen. It can happen when the economy doesn't do as well, which would mean your donations and grants are impacted by the economic conditions. One way to do this is to manage to a balanced budget. And by that, I mean, you plan for the year how much money you think is coming in, and based on that, you determine how much you can spend. But as you go through the year, you may find that the revenue is not coming in as at the levels that you expected. And in order to deal with that, you've got to start to cut back on the money you're spending, because again, you can't deal with deficits on a year in and year out basis. A balanced budget's a good place to land if you can do it. Now, in again, risk management, some sources of money are more resilient than others. For instance, annual grants. Once a foundation offers grants, they've already planned to spend that money. So if the economic conditions change, they're still able to do that. Sometimes you have grants that are renewable, where you'll do it and you can renew it for future years. So it's kind of back to having all your eggs in one basket. Try to diversify your money, but recognize that there's things outside of your control and your donors' control that could impact how much money you have coming in. And it's important to protect the long-term mission. Next slide, please. Okay, we're kind of near the end. We've got 10 minutes or so left. I'd like to pause at this point, ask if there's any questions.
No questions in the box. A couple of people were asking about whether they would get a copy of the slide deck, and we did confirm that that's correct. And
Yes.
Mike's slide deck will come with all the slides you see today, plus the additional handouts he mentioned earlier at the introduction.
Yes, thank you. And maybe while we have a minute and we have the text or the chat box going, are there other organizations out there, other foundations that you're aware of that help nonprofits that we haven't highlighted today? We'd welcome that, and we'd be happy to share it with the other participants.
Mm-hmm. Mike, we did get a couple of resources in the chat box earlier. One who seems to help with some marketing activities, and that was from Mike. And then a gentleman, Bob, who actually assists with nonprofits with reducing expenses and creating cash flow. So they are in the chat box for anyone who's interested in those resources. You can copy those down and bring them along with you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Well, we've kind of landed at a good time. Maria, are there any other slides to cover from a score standpoint?
There are some, although there is just a new question that came in the Q&A.
Mhm.
So we have Justice, who is a Cumberland County 501(c) human trafficking youth and maternity group home. And he needs help with funding and a building. And so I guess he's looking for some guidance on how to go forward.
Okay. Well, I think typically, now there's two different things. There's funding for day-to-day operations, which, a lot of times you can get grants from foundations for that. To build a building, that's a capital campaign. And there you tend to have a different audience. Typically, large foundations, such as the Longwood Foundation and groups like that, typically like to donate money towards a building or bricks and mortar. So my short answer would be, is look in your local community for foundations like we've talked about here, and then have a discussion with those foundations around what opportunities they provide for grants, and also what advice they can give you about networking with, more of the, kind of capital contribution type foundations, which, are again in a position to provide money. You might also, though, based on your mission, contact your local government through either, the domestic abuse or family court, and see if there's programs that they have that support the kind of folks that you're also trying to help.
Thanks, Mike. We have a couple more questions.
Okay.
From Eva, what have you seen as the biggest pitfalls to starting a nonprofit?
I frankly think it's kind of the dose of reality. And I say that meaning when people typically want to start nonprofits, based on my experience, they have a very sincere passion about a topic, about helping either, people like a domestic abuse or horse rescues or mental health issues. And what they find is that in order to really get the ball rolling, there's a lot of work involved, because you're really basically starting an organization. So it can be daunting in the beginning when you start to realize how much money you're going to need, how many resources you're going to need. And that, again, is kind of why in the beginning we mentioned, maybe you start to volunteer at an organization that's doing the same kind of things that you're interested in, and get an idea how they got started. And while they may view you as competition, more than likely they'll be willing to share with you what they went through, and that would help you deal with some of these hurdles it takes to get things going.
Thanks, Mike. We have two more questions. From Margaret, are there special considerations for medical services that are also covered by insurance?
That's possible. It's kind of like the fee for service thing we talked about. But also with medical, you need to have the right licenses and things like that. But again, there you're probably more likely to work with the county in terms of, are there programs that they have that support that kind of initiative? Pardon me. But, getting money for services from insurance companies is fine. You just need to make sure that you qualify with them properly.
Okay. And it seems like one last question here from Susan is, you mentioned earlier something about a 7-year period, and she would like to know, what is the 7 years from when to when?
Yeah, well, that's basically a rule of thumb in business, that the economy, the U.S. economy, and to some extent the global economy, goes through 7-year cycles where you'll see growth, then you'll see a plateauing, and then you see a recession or some reduction in economic activity. With where we right now are with COVID, and with all the government support that's being put in the economy, we're kind of out of that right now. So you can't call this a typical economy. But the basic premise is that things will ebb and flow between the stock market, people's ability to make donations, and that's really what the point I was trying to make. Things don't stay static. They do move in up and down cycles.
Some of which I'm sure are unpredictable, right, Mike?
Very much so. And again, with COVID now, we're kind of in another whole range of things because, the government support will certainly do a lot to bolster the economy. The stock market's doing well, but these aren't typical times.
No. Okay. Well, then we'll go ahead and move on. Is there anything else you had to share, Mike, before we shift to closing the program out a little bit here with
No,
SCORE?
I appreciate everyone's attention. I hope we helped you. And again, I'll just make another pitch for SCORE. We do offer mentoring, we do offer courses, and Maria will go through some of that again. Thank you.
I just want to make sure we covered this. I think we did cover it as part of your talking today. Okay, great.
Yeah. And
All
again,
right.
we'd appreciate any feedback that would help us make this better. Thank you.
By all means, yes. First of all, thank you, Mike, for sharing all your experience and your knowledge with the team today. As we mentioned, the presentation and the recorded webinar will be sent over to you by email later today after the session. And for those of you who have a SCORE mentor, by all means, check in with your mentor about what you learned today and maybe what some of your action items would be going forward as a result of what you learned and what you heard about. SCORE is here to help you with the next steps to develop a successful nonprofit organization or any other type of business issue or question that you have. If you are not working with a SCORE mentor yet, you can request one by going on our website link that's shown here. And again, it will be sent to you, or calling the number to speak with our admin, Lillian Harvey, and she can help to match you up with a mentor that's appropriate for your challenges or your questions. And then, then you can continue to work with your mentor on your plan and your program. Okay, so we are going to wrap in just a second, but we have one more poll that we'd like to put up that we like to get your feedback. So as Mike said, this helps us to improve our own programming. I'm going to launch this. There's, I think, 8 very easy questions. They're mostly yes and no questions. If you could just take a minute to go through those for us, we really would appreciate your feedback. I think many of you probably know we offer almost 100 workshops a year. In this year, it's been webinars, primarily all virtual, and on at least 30 to 35 topics. So we really welcome you to join us. So if you get a second, just hopefully you can see this poll. Great, thank you.
And Maria, while the mic's open, I want to thank you for your help with this today. It was great.
Oh, yeah, no problem. And for those of you who've already completed the poll, you see just on the screen here our office location. We're doing everything virtual at this point in time, but it does look like the market is starting to slowly and carefully open up. And we do look forward to doing some live in-person mentoring and live in-person education sometime later in 2021. We'll keep you posted on our plans there. But don't hesitate to call us at any time with questions that you have or any information that you might need. We have a lot of resources handy, so we'd love to help. Okay, it looks like we have just about everyone who's going to participate in there. So with that said, I think we just want to thank you all for coming today and being so interested in this topic, asking some really great questions. And it's a wrap. So enjoy the rest of the day. Hope you enjoy the nice warm weather we're having. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.